thought we'd start, as we did in planning this conversation, talking about the fact that there's different types of boards. And so what I want to ask the panelists to share is a little bit about sort of what they've seen in their careers, either what types of boards they've worked with, what types of boards they have themselves, to just show a little bit of the variation and the breadth that there is. And in particular, because leading to this question, what that leads into is if they can start thinking about one of the key fundamental pieces we thought that it's almost a precursor for this question of building a strong and diverse board of directors is you really have to determine kind of what your organization's goals and mission are. Well, you have to know that, I should say, and to use that to determine what kind of board you're actually trying to build, right? What kind of board members are you looking for? And we'll get into that, but helping us share a little and give perspective on what kinds of boards you've seen organizations look for. And I think you'll hear in the answers some of the types that we've all encountered. So anybody want to start? Should we start at the end and work our way back?
Sure. I had lunch with my executive director yesterday, and he told me the day that he started, he preceded me by a few years. He said that he showed up for a board meeting and no board member showed up.
Oh.
Wow.
And so it was indicative of an organization that clearly had no engagement with their board and was maybe a little bit rudderless from the leadership that preceded him. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about today in building a diverse board, it also requires the board chair and ED to set the tone for what the organization is going to be, both in terms of engagement from when you join a board. I think there's a lot of people that come from corporate America, like I did, who don't know what we're supposed to be doing on a nonprofit board. A lot of you have been in the ecosystem for a long time, understand the dynamics, understand the governance, the fundraising, and then people like me show up and we're like, I don't understand. The concept of the give-get was like foreign to me when I started. And so, outlining what you want your board to stand for and, from a mission point of view that Tom was sort of talking about, and how to really get that across and make the connections with people on the board so that they feel engaged is crucial.
That's great. Thank you. Angela.
One of the early boards that I sat on when I was being recruited, they told me, oh, it's a working board. Our board members are very engaged. And I thought, oh, that's great. And I thought when they said a working board, they meant that, these are board members who really care. They show up at board meetings. They, share their perspectives and their expertise and all of that. Come to find out that it was a hands-on working board where board members were doing the work of staff. Why? Because it was a startup organization. They didn't have very many staff, and they really did need the board members to do the work that in another organization a paid staff member would do. So when you hear working board, definitely ask what they mean by that. I was working full-time, as many of the other board members were as well. I did not really have the time to be their kind of working board member. So we figured out, how I could be useful. But a working board, we do hear this from other organizations, not just startups.
Yep.
But it's a particular culture of an organization where the board members are, in fact, very, very engaged.
That's great. Thank you. And Merle?
I think it's important to acknowledge that you need a different kind of board for every stage of your growth. When you're just beginning, it needs to be small and close. And I'm not talking about your friends, because, it's... I would stay away from that and recruit the talent you need. Always, when you're looking for a board member, of course, as Alan said, you have to have the mission of the organization in mind. That's first and foremost. But when you're starting an organization, you have so much on your plate. So you need a finance person, you need a marketing person, you need a lawyer, because you got to write some bylaws. And just look at areas of business. You need somebody who knows something about accounting, and that's it. They work with you, they advise you, they help you hire a staff. Oh yeah, human resources is also a very important beginning skill. When you're a mid-sized organization, you can start building up your board. So it wouldn't be so bad to have 2 lawyers. I wouldn't advise more than that because they have opinions.
And rarely are they the same opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Marco, you're right. And you can supplement the skill levels. But again, stick to your mission. Create a culture. Create a culture from the very beginning. Make sure that everybody is on board and working in the same way. When you get to be mid-size, start your committees. Because in any nonprofit, it's really great to set it up so that you have committees for finance, you have committees for strategic planning, you have all the committees you need, but that the work is done on the committee level. And that policies are set on the committee level, because this all adds up to really smooth board meetings. If the chair of the committee stands up and says, we as the Committee of Finance have decided whatever, all the board members nod and say, that's a great idea. If you open up the discussion at a board meeting, it's really hard to accomplish things. And if somebody is off agenda as you run your board meeting, just say, great idea. Let's take it off this board meeting, form an ad hoc committee, and you can report to us at the next meeting what the ad hoc committee says on this issue. When you're large, you're big now, right? You need money. And it's at this point that you go look for your people in finance, your more prestigious members of your community, right? And you build the money you need to achieve your goals.
That's great. I think we've heard a lot of wisdom already. So unpacking the question, or the topic, I should say, of this session, I sort of viewed it as a two-parter, right? It's building a strong and diverse board of directors, and in my mind, there's sort of two areas. And I think, Merle, you've actually just started in already on the first part. I would consider sort of what makes a board member strong, right? And and then the second part will be what makes a set of board members diverse. But so starting on the strong part, Merle, I think you've shared some really good insights onto sort of ways in which to make the board members and the board strong, to find strong board members and to make the board strong at the various stages. But so I don't know if you have anything to add there, and I wanted to invite Angela and Alan if there's any additional tips you have and thoughts about sort of ways in which to ensure that you have a strong, functioning, effective board of directors.
The only thing I have to add is that the executive director and the chair of the board have very strong relationships with each and every member of the board. Show the love. Show the love, show the appreciation, because you're going to be leaning on them and you're going to be asking a lot from them. And if they feel appreciated and they feel the love, you'll grow together as an organization and you'll achieve your goals.
I would second that, and the communication is so important, constant communication, not to the point of bugging your board members. They have jobs, they have lives, but in terms of keeping them updated, keeping them informed, and whether it's, you get together 2 or 3 times a year, one-on-one, just to check in and to hear from board members individually is really crucial, because you could have a strong and engaged board and lose them if you are not in touch, if they're not feeling the love.
I think it's important to recognize what roles you need on your board. If you have an audit committee, you have a finance committee, investment committee, and then think about how you create a pipeline for filling those roles over a 5 or 10 year period. Because people aren't going to want to serve in these capacities if they're high stress for more than 2 to 3 years. And so developing a pipeline, making sure that the more junior people are engaged from the start is a nice way to create continuity.
If I may, I want to underscore a couple of points I just heard, all valuable wisdom. But one of the things, again, I think it's important to remember, both remind ourselves, remind our fellow board members that whereas it's critical, and certainly once an organization reaches a large size, as Merle pointed out, funding is not the only thing you look to board members for. So it's important, whereas it's often tempting, and there's a kind of a conventional wisdom also, right, of saying that your board members are sort of a key part of your fundraising, therefore you want to bring board members who both have resources themselves or access to resources. That's true. All of the panelists here have mentioned that you want skill sets. You also need different aspects of expertise, and you can really sort of leverage and need to really leverage your board in terms of having them help you govern the organization through their own areas of knowledge. The other thing I wanted to mention is, which alludes a sort of a helpful tip it took me a while to also figure out and learn is, as everybody has mentioned, you want someone who understands finance, who understands nonprofit finance. You want someone who understands nonprofit law, all of those kinds of things. And it's great to find those things. Especially given, as Merle pointed out wisely, there's sort of a life cycle of nonprofit organizations and they go through phases. It may not be easy in the early days to find someone who is a nonprofit legal expert who's going to join your board. It's also worth noting that there are resources out there so that you don't have to figure it out all on your own. Just one, not an endorsement here, but just one organization is a group called Board Source, right? There are other organizations like it out there who will provide templates, who will provide training, who will provide assistance. And so you actually may even be able to provide a pretty valuable benefit to your own board members by saying to them, we'd really love you to help us with our audit committee, and we want to get you up to speed and want to get you knowledgeable about that. We want to support you in getting the kind of training and guidance and support that to help you be able to be an effective audit committee chair. And so they actually walk away with valuable skills and experience, and you get someone who has the kind of knowledge and insight you need for your group. And we'll move quickly because, again, we want to jump into some Q&A. We want to save some time for dialogue. Part two of the conversation, which I suspect is where at least many of us in this day and age, our eye gets drawn to, right? This question of a diverse board. So let me just throw out to you all, again, as we talked about in the prep, how should we define diversity first and foremost? And how do we ensure that it's more than just checking a box? More than just sort of saying we've got one from this group and two from that group and so on. What does it mean to have meaningful diversity on a board of directors? Anybody want to start? We can go in any order.
Go ahead, Mel.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that there was a really big paradigm shift in nonprofits. It used to be, in the olden days, nonprofits were kind of a rich people saying, okay, I'm going to do this for the community, I'm going to do that for the community.
Charity.
But nobody really asked the community what they needed. And I think now we are more aware of that. We've switched around our paradigm. We listen to the people that we serve. We are serving people, and we listen to them. And always to have board representation of the people from the community you're serving, I think is really very important.
Not without me, not about me, without me.
That's right.
And it can be very complicated. If, in fact, your board does have a give or get, in order to be on this board, you
We're going
have
to come back to that.
But what happens if you want people on the board who are not able to meet that? If I sit on a board, the New York Foundation for the Arts, that does have a pretty high give or get, but the board went through a very important conversation to figure out how can we keep our give or get, but still have artists, working artists, on our board whose perspective we need, but who are not going to be able to meet the give or get. So there are ways of doing that to make sure that you have people from the communities that you serve be on your board without necessarily a financial burden.
That's great.
At my organization, Save the Music, we have a survey for both the staff and the board on an annual basis to determine how they feel about their own diversity. And the ED and myself a few years ago kind of set out a target of having 50% diversity on our board because we wanted to have the board composition and the staff composition reflect kind of the communities that we serve. And so many of the nonprofits today, whether you're in climate or whether you're in education, are serving underprivileged populations, which tend to be Black and brown populations. And so to get beyond this idea of just a checkbox, if you want to really adequately serve these communities, I think you really have to have people from those communities on your board in some form or function. And there's variations of, there's the board of directors, there's an advisory board, there's a junior board, there's different ways to kind of skin a cat as you learn how to build an effective board.
Mm-hmm. And diversity can be so many different things. I was working with a girls' school, and the board was primarily alumni, so it was almost all women. And they said, this is not healthy. Yes, we do represent the community that we serve, which is girls pre-K through 12, but we don't feel that this is a healthy board. We need to have more different, we need men, we need non-alums on the board. So that was something that they undertook, strategically. So for them, diversity was gender in particular, and also people not from their community, not alumni. So the word diverse or diversity can take all different kinds of characteristics depending on the culture of the organization and, again, the community being served.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that, and thank you for bringing that up, Angela, because two things I wanted to mention is, again, I think it didn't used to be, and I think it's starting to be, but again, I don't think we've fully reached there yet, where the DEI journey that so many nonprofit organizations go through, I find boards of directors often lag behind it. And I think this is a good opportunity to sort of help a board of directors move along its DEI journey and truly exploring what is full diversity, what is full inclusion, what is full equity, and thinking more broadly than just one particular type of identity, right? Excuse me, whether it be race, whether it be sexual identity, whether it be whatever type of community, whatever type of work. It's often most specifically related to the mission of the organization. But thinking more broadly about bringing other voices to the table can be really valuable, and again, it can be sometimes an oversight because we're working against this historical trend of not having board members from a community. We focus very heavily on it. I think we've done, most nonprofits have done a good job, and hopefully you all, I suspect, are already far along that path of making sure that you include community voice. The one thing I want to plug, and that I wanted to mention, the other thing I wanted to mention and plug that Angela alluded to, is making a suggestion around this idea of including people, not from your community, not just from the community served, but also not from the similar backgrounds as many of the rest of the board and of the staff. And one of the reasons, and one of the ways I believe you can make it not just checking a box, is understanding you can be very strategic and proactive and deliberate about bringing in those folks and leveraging those board members to help increase exposure of your organization to entire new populations and communities. Having them essentially be the ambassadors for your work to a group of people that are their network, that are their relationships, who may not have any natural connection to your mission or to the community you serve, and who probably should be educated both about the community you serve as well as about the work that you do. And that can be something that can really raise your visibility. It can help diversify your funding base. It can bring on new champions and potentially even open up new avenues and opportunities that you hadn't even thought of yourself based on sort of that kind of cross-pollination. So that's something I wanted to add in, taking a moderator privilege.
It was great. I'm taking notes.
Awesome. Awesome. And we talked about reflecting the community. So now we've said all of these great things that you should do, and that's just so easy now that we've said to do it. You got to find these folks.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you all, what are y'all's insights? What are your thoughts about how do you find these board members?
Nonprofits themselves that provide all kinds of resources for nonprofits, and one of the things they offer is a way to find board members, essentially classified or a dating app, but for board members. And so, number one, they provide training for people who they know they want to serve on a board, but they don't really know anything about nonprofits and how to do that and how to be a good board member. They provide training for those folks. And then for the nonprofits, they provide a way to connect with people who might be appropriate. So they find out from these these prospective board members, what are your interests, what are your passions, what missions would really speak to you. And as a nonprofit, you put into the database, this is our size, this is what we're looking for. We definitely need somebody with legal background, or we need somebody with financial background, and this is what our mission is. And then they do essentially a matchmaking. So here in New York, NICON, which is the New York Council on Nonprofits, offers that. And I think the Support Center still offers that as well. But again, in other states, I know for sure that exists. So that's one way of finding board members. And you still have to do the interviewing and all of that, but it's a great way to start with a pool.
Awesome. Anything to add, Alan?
We had a board member who worked as a corporate recruiter, and he decided to just post on LinkedIn and said, my organization is looking for a board member with these characteristics. And we ended up getting a marketing executive from Pepsi who came on board because she was looking at the right time and saw the classified ad, for lack of a better term. So word of mouth is obviously a very, very powerful way to get board members. I think one of the challenges, again, is people get into their mid-30s where they now have enough power, experience, and disposable income to be board members at small to medium-sized organizations, but they don't know where to go. And so meeting them where they're already at, like a LinkedIn, is a very effective way to reach them.
Anything to add, Merle?
Yeah, every community has membership organizations, lawyers,
Right.
and every community has them.
The professional association.
Professional associations, membership associations. There was at one time, 100 Women of Wall Street. There's lots of those places. So, and they're usually nonprofits, and they're usually run by an executive director who knows your issues. And, they're a great resource for board members. Also, having a strong nominating committee is really important. And nominating committee is great because, it's not that demanding on people's times on your board. So you can have a large nominating committee, but you're not taking up a lot of time from the people on the committee. And I did have a third thought. I forgot. I'll remember it.
One of the things that Merle and I talked about in the planning, she said, it's very important that, that the nominating committee do its work. I would tack on to that technically everybody on your board should have their antenna up for potential board members as they go about their daily lives. Your board members should be encouraged to be ambassadors of your organization. Their friends and their colleagues should get sick of hearing them talk about what a fabulous organization they sit on and the wonderful things that their organization is doing. Because eventually what begins to happen is a colleague talking to somebody says, oh, you're interested in such and such. I work with somebody who sits on this board. The two of you should get together. And whether or not it turns out that's an appropriate board member or not, the word starts getting out. So it should be, dating myself, I'm older than you are, that Herbal Essence shampoo commercial of, she told two friends and she told two friends.
And so
That's what your board members should be doing.
That's true.
There's a nominating committee for sure. It's definitely their responsibility, but all board members should be out there, championing the organization and keeping their ears open for potential board members.
There's this idea in marketing that marketing is multi-channel and multi-touch.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get a board member from a single conversation.
Right.
And so if you think about cultivating potential board members, it's like the classic marketing funnel. You're going to start with 100 people at the top, but you're only going to convert one at the bottom. So what are those conversion points that you have in mind to get them to where they need to be on your board?
I remember what I was going to say.
I was going to ask.
Committee structure. Committees are great ways to bring in new board members, potential new board members. It's also a way to test if people are in alignment with the culture of your organization, the goals of your organization. So program committees for sure. Finance is a little touchy because it's a lot of confidential information. But having people serve on committees is a great way to get to know them and then promote them to board members.
3 quick additions I'm going to add. I'm going to take privilege to add. One, obviously it should be obvious, but just in case not, right? It's like leverage every network you have. Obviously YANA is a great place, and Yale more broadly is a great place. But think of other networks, other affinities, other roles you have, and encourage your board members to think more expansively that way. At least I know, and I'm not the only one, tend to compartmentalize my life, and I have to remember that my hometown friends are not completely divorced from my work, and I can at times talk about it in a way that entices them and invites them in to think about it, and you may find sort of new contexts and relationships. That's one. 2 is this, back to this point we talked about in terms of board members reflecting the community being served. Think deliberately, proactively, and take a longer-term lens about truly cultivating and growing your own board members. Think about your clients, think about your members, think about your service recipients, and think about have a plan or have the possibility of someone not necessarily being a great board member now, but in 5 or 10 years, and staying in touch and having relationships with them, having ways to stay involved with them and to keep them involved in ways that they can then ultimately choose to join in a governance capacity. And along those same lines, having a really robust and strong volunteer program is also another way to find unexpected board members. And there's the added benefit of, even if they don't choose to become board members, you can leverage their volunteer efforts to help your organization. But think about your volunteer pool as another potential set of candidates for board members, because they're going to get to know your organization better than the average person who doesn't.
I hear you, executive director of this teeny tiny organization, saying, I don't have time. I don't have time to have lunches with potential board members, or I barely have enough time to get my work done. Use your channels of communication that you already have set up. I hope you all have some kind of database that has people's names and contact information and all that you use for fundraising and other things. In the newsletter, or if you use snail mail for any kind of communication or fundraising, put a handwritten note. Great to see you 3 months ago at that conference or whatever. Hope you're doing something. There are ways that you can use technology to help you with this kind of communication and staying in touch and cultivating, so that 5 years later, this is the same executive director who always puts a little note on my whatever. You know what? I have time now. I want to see if she needs a board member.
Yeah. Similarly, again, deploy your board members. We already said it, right, in terms of prospecting. When you have your annual dinner, an assignment for your board members is go talk to 3 total strangers. Yeah. You may find somebody, if they came to your annual dinner, they're a supporter in some way, shape, or form, right? Anybody who gives medium to larger size, and based on your organization's budget is what you define, a donation, have your board member call just to thank them for their contribution and ask them what motivated them to give, because they may really care about your issue and your cause and have no relationship to you other than having been sort of at arm's length, and that's a way to bring them in to potentially encourage them. And that way the overworked executive director doesn't have to do it all by themselves. All right, to mangle the Shakespeare, to give or get or not to give or get? That is the question.
Right.
So let's talk about give or get. What are your all's thoughts? Pro, con, and why? And you gave, I know, a little bit earlier, Angela, about sort of a way to do it, it depends and with modifications, but what do folks think?
Does everyone know
Go ahead, Alan.
the give or get?
That's a good, probably. Let's level set. That's a great point.
So the idea of a give or get is you're either going to donate individually or you're going out to fundraise a set amount for an organization. And I think a small organization might have a give get in the low thousands, and a New York Phil might have a give or get of $250,000 a year, if not more. And so organizations, I think, often struggle with finding board members. We're always aspiring to raise our give or get every couple of years, but at a certain point you almost price yourself out because you kind of run out of people, especially if you're always looking to maintain diversity on your board. And so how stringent are you going to be about requiring members to hit that every year? How do you accommodate artists or working artists on your board? So these are the challenges of the give or get structure.
Another challenge just has to do with, sort of thinking about it philosophically. Are people paying to be on my board? Is that what that means? If I require a $5,000 donation, either that they give or that they get somehow from their friends or whatever, are they essentially paying to be on my board? And the answer is no. Part of a board member's responsibility is fundraising and to help keep the organization afloat. And so to actually put a number on that, there's nothing wrong with that. It's definitely not unethical or illegal, or the state attorney general would be on your case. But don't worry about whether there's something a little uncomfortable about that. Discomfort usually comes with telling somebody that you're cultivating as a potential board member that there is this amount of money. It's one thing to just ask somebody for a donation and they can say yes or no, but a lot of executive directors feel very uncomfortable talking about an actual number when they're talking to a prospective board member, and you shouldn't. It's very common. Most people that you're talking to will have had some kind of experience with, or at least understanding of, yeah, this is typical in a board. And even though the number may not be as big as it is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they're probably expecting that there's going to be some number. So, just get up your courage, maybe write a little script ahead of time, and just weave it into all the other requirements of a board member. We expect board members to attend all of our events. We expect them to attend almost, as most board meetings. We expect them to donate or to cultivate $5,000 a year. And we will help you with that. This is not something, if you don't feel comfortable asking, we will help you with that. Weave it into the whole conversation of what the expectations are for a board member. And then it's not so uncomfortable.
So, not surprising, I'm going to be a little contrarian, and I don't believe in give or gets. I think if you have set a standard for a give or get and certain people on your board can't make it, it kind of makes them feel uncomfortable. It really does. And I think it's the board chair. I'm president of a small organization, a small nonprofit in the Berkshires, and I know everybody on my board's capacity. I know what they can afford to give. And if it's November's rolling around and I haven't heard from them, I write them an email and talk about what we've achieved in the year, what we're looking forward to achieving in the next year, and kind of, ramp it up and say, I'd love to talk to you about this year's gift. And I think I just don't like barriers to begin with. And I think if you set a give or get, again, that's the type of small community organization that I'm used to. I don't want anybody to say, some 25-year-old who's just starting out in their career, I don't want them to say, gosh, I don't have, thousands of dollars, and, and it makes them feel somehow smaller with the rest of their board. So that's what I believe.
So I say, if you want that 25-year-old who's just starting out and doesn't have a whole lot of money, you say to the rest of the board, we've got a $5,000 give or get. There's this amazing candidate for our board that I think we need to have, who cannot possibly afford that. So cough it up and find the $5,000 between the rest of you.
Oh, also, I do believe in 100% contribution of the
Yes.
board,
Yes.
even if it's $10. Because you cannot go to a funder and say, give me money when your own board isn't at the 100%. In fact, everybody at YANA got a nice friendly email from me because I'm chairing this conference saying, hi, you haven't given to the conference or the gala yet. So yes, everybody on the YANA board has given, contributed, and for the most part is here.
So you can see it's we're about to get to Q&A, sorry. Real quick, and I'll call you. You can see it is fraught, let's say. I don't even know if it rises to the level of controversial, but it's certainly a fraught issue. It is a fairly common practice still in the nonprofit world. It's worth noting. So even as you wrestle with it, even as you try to figure out modifications and revisions that adapt to it, it's worth knowing at least that if you aren't already aware that it's out there. The one piece I want to do, and then that is kind of my last question anyway, before we get into the Q&A, and I see already two eager hands to ask about this. I did want to raise and see if you all have thoughts. Angela alluded to this. The flip side of this question with the give or get in terms of people feeling like they paid to join your board, more in my mind than anything untoward. I think it's worth also surfacing that particularly, and maybe it relates to the give or get, but I think even when there's not a give or get, board members who give a substantial amount of resources to an organization sometimes start to feel some entitlement, Sure. Right? They start to feel that they don't give as much money to not have their opinion heard. In fact, more than even their fellow board members. So how do you navigate that? How do you wrestle with that? How do you push back on that challenge of folks who sort of say, I didn't give you this much money for you to ignore when I tell you to do something?
It's a tough one.
Haven't really run into that problem, to
good.
be honest. I think I think when we're living in a place like New York where people have capacity to give millions of dollars, maybe you run into that dynamic. Judging from the questions that Marco asked at the beginning, we're generally dealing with smaller annual budgets. And to me, particularly for younger generations, everyone's trying to find better alignment between what they're passionate about and how they want to spend their time and their money. And so the idea of paying to be on a board, to me, is actually a good alignment for people to understand, like, that's where I want to put my money where my mouth is. I want to put my time where my mouth is. And when you have a conversation with a young person, nobody knows how to intuitively write their first $1,000 check. It's like the first time you pay $1,000 in taxes. You can't believe that you're on the hook for that much in taxes. And so I think part of the challenge of being on a nonprofit or being a part of the leadership in a nonprofit is training people to understand how to be philanthropic in the first place. Mm. And you can't train them unless you're having slightly uncomfortable conversations about, hey, you work at Google, you're 25 years old, you're making 150 grand as an engineer, you can afford $1,000 at 25 to this organization if the alignment is appropriate. So I think there's ways to have the conversations.
And it has so much to do with the culture of the organization and the culture of the board, and the board's understanding that they are there for governance, not day-to-day management or making decisions about things. And where that is different is in particularly in arts and culture, because that sector is just very different. If you're a trustee of a board of a museum, and especially if in your will you're going to be giving your collection or some amazing piece of art to the museum after you die, and you're contributing $1.5 million a year, yeah, there's going to be a culture there of, and I get to have my say about certain things. And as was just described, one of the ways that museums deal with that is to have an exhibit committee or a purchasing committee. This committee gets to choose 3 pieces of art that the museum will buy this year, and that's a way that board members can feel they have, they're involved, they have some say in certain things, but not in the day-to-day, and certainly not, not just wielding, their checkbook as a magic wand. So I would say in arts and culture, that it's very different than in other nonprofits, and that's how arts and cultural organizations have tried to find ways to mitigate this feeling of, I gave you a big check, now I get to tell you what to do.
Well, it's worth just pointing out, right, that I think that's potentially one of the challenges that can be confronted if you go after high net worth individuals to join your board, is that sometimes there is that dynamic that can occur, and that's where sort of maybe the careful vetting, right, and the strong relationship building on the front end and being clear about both the values and the culture of the organization can help to mitigate, and maybe with any luck it's diminishing in the broader sector. But I know over years I've heard many a war story about folks who have to deal with the donor on the board who sort of throws their weight around. So, all right, let's jump into questions. I saw here and then here. Oh, and now there's a whole flight. But first, for 1 and 2, and then we'll go 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember your numbers. Help me.
Whoever donates the most will take
yes,
the question.
who gets the question first. Exactly right.
Hi, thank you. I am the president of a nonprofit, also in the Berkshires, actually. We must know a lot of people in common. And the way we've always approached Give or Get with any organization that I've been at is we expect you to put us at the top of your giving while you're on our board, top 3, or a meaningful gift for you. And so we, and now we're at a point where we can sit down with people when they're coming on the board and say, discuss a number, we hope you'll be at this level or whatever. But I'm really curious to know more, Angela, on how you, kind of have somebody's give or get covered, because I think we're at a point where we could raise the bar, and we need to scale up. And I have people who can give $100,000 or more, but I don't want to create this 2-class system. You're in the diversity category, so you don't have to pay. So how do you do that?
A couple of ways. And first of all, it has to be very transparent on all sides, so that the 25-year-old, just coming out of college understands this is how our board works. Make it a budget, line item that is the total that should be coming, the total revenue that should be coming from the board. How that gets divided is how that gets implemented is then X number of board members are going to be giving the exact same amount, which totals this, and that covers the give or get amount for this person. Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly. So you say to the board, as a board, you have to raise X amount of money, and that will cover, it's a board of, let's say it's a board of 25 people.
Yep.
We have to raise this amount of money from the board, and
Doesn't even
24 people will, it's actually 24 people who are actually going to raise that amount of money, but it covers 25 board members.
Right.
That's
great.
I want to add, I love this discussion. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the different places you both come out on it, because I think it's just such a difficult topic. And I appreciate this idea of being transparent and then perhaps having even different levels depending on capability for younger people, etc. Do you ever divide it also up according to time, treasure, and talent? In other words, some people will contribute their talents as a lawyer or an HR person or whatever, or some people will do more volunteer work on the board and therefore are giving in some way if they don't have capability. And do you factor that into any of your thinking about it?
No, because everybody should be giving their time, treasure, and talent, and treasure is the only one that you can truly put a number on. Technically, the government does actually have a dollar figure for volunteer hours that you could actually calculate it, but otherwise, pretty much everybody should be giving their time, talent, and treasure. And yes, it is going to fluctuate, at least with the talent and the time. But the treasure, that one has a dollar figure on it, and it goes on the budget. So yes, that one just is.
But I will say I actually have seen structure models that you're talking about. Whereas I understand Angela's point, I have seen organizations who sort of say the give or get can take different forms, and there are particular needs, whether it's specific expertise, which essentially can be in kind and can be quantified even more. So legal advice absolutely has a value, et cetera, accounting, et cetera. And so there's ways, particularly sort of when it leans more towards the working board kind of thing, or even if there's concrete specifics. And then I've also seen another solution, a different way to get around this question of folks who don't have the means to give treasure, is to sort of say time, basically labor, can equate to giving of actual dollars, because in theory, that labor, even though the government does have a dollar amount for hours of volunteering, the point is the organization benefits from the labor because they don't have to pay someone else to do that labor anyway, right? And so there is sort of even regardless of the actual IRS formula, the idea being that's a way a person can express their quote unquote give or get in a way that other board members might feel is comparable, because again, some of the board members who write checks are sort of like, I would give more time, but I don't, and I'm happy to give money and let the organization figure out how to spend it wisely, and another person sort of say, and they say, and I'm all right if a different board member gives much more time because they don't have the money to give. Yes.
I'm the Chief Advancement Officer of a major arts and culture institution. It's based here in the city, but has international footprint. I'm also responsible for the GovNom process, and it's been one that's been operated without a lot of structure or discipline. So I'm in the process of trying to come up.
So typical, basically.
And so I'm trying to provide a little bit of a rubric, come up with a rubric to bring some discipline to the process, and helping members of the Nom and Gov committee start to think about who do I know, what are the characteristics that or criteria that would be valuable for us to look at as potential board members. How do you feel about the use of a rubric or matrix where you try to help identify not just the criteria, but some sub-points to help define or describe the attributes related to the criteria. And it's a bit of box checking, admittedly, but it at least gives them some guidance so that the conversation within the committee doesn't just become a wide-ranging ramble. I know, I'd be curious, feedback, experience, pushback, whatever.
I like having some guardrails to guide conversations, because I think many boards have a tendency where the group comes together quarterly, they don't otherwise interact on a regular basis, people kind of throw, I know this, I know that, and then it disappears and there's no accountability. So having a rubric or having guideposts makes sense. I do think that there's a finite limit to how much detail you want to put around that in order for things to be efficient. Because at a certain, like sometimes board members don't even read the board deck. Mm-hmm. They're not reading the financials.
Yeah, definitely.
And so then to bring like a multi-page rubric to say, this is the way that we're going to approach solving this problem, it's like anything that the board's trying to accomplish. It's got to be bite-sized enough to get things done.
Anything to
I think it's a great way to start. And there are some organizations that use it, ad infinitum. They, every year they go back to that matrix. And of course, as boards turn over, different boxes get unchecked and need to be checked again. So I think certainly in your situation, it's a great way to start.
Yeah. I've seen a fair number of like board inventory documents that are basically that sort of catalog sort of the skill sets, the backgrounds, et cetera. Whereas you're right that it can facilitate box checking, it's also sort of worth noting that like unless you actually check, unless you actually count and create the boxes, you may not know what you're missing, right? And so that helps you also illuminate where there are the gaps on the board, both in terms of skill set and in terms of identities as well.
But it sort of sucks when one person is responsible for creating that, and they're the gatekeeper of that document, and they put all this time into it, and nobody else is contributing or reading or upkeeping it, and then you're sitting there like, why did I do all this effort? Could the ROI have been better allocated somewhere else? So again, I think finding that what's right size for your organization is important.
Does somebody remember who was number 4? No.
My question is answered.
Oh, okay, perfect. So maybe 5. All right.
So I have 2 questions. What is the value? Is there a value to having ex officio board members? I see that very often. Government officials who are very passionate about not-for-profit, but so that's one question. And then the second, what is the value again for efficacy of having a stewardship council versus an advisory board? I mean, are there certain? It seems to be there are all these non-board positions that people are creating to draw in more people, or form a dumb committee, auxiliary committee. What's your take on that?
I think there's a lot of value in having something like an advisory board where the financial commitment isn't necessarily there, but you're still getting domain expertise or expanding your network in some form or fashion. So for example, at Save the Music Foundation, we have a music advisory board composed of a lot of record label heads or people in C-level positions. And with varying levels of engagement, but just a few weeks ago, the head of one of the record labels was like, Ed Sheeran wants to visit a bunch of schools. And Save the Music is the one, the charity. So this guy who had otherwise been pretty low engagement, all of a sudden had Ed Sheeran visit like 6 schools in LA and 6 schools here in New York, and it was all on social media, on TikTok. And it was a big deal for us as an organization. Right. And it didn't require this record exec to come to quarterly meetings and have a give-get. So there's a way, I think, to figure out the needs of extending the tentacles of your network that aren't financial. But again, that's very dependent on what your organization is trying to accomplish. And to the ex officio officials, like if you're dealing in a policy space or you're dealing with politicians on a regular basis, there's obviously a lot of advantage in having somebody who understands the bureaucracy and knows who's actually pulling the strings behind the scenes. So that's valuable, I think.
There are other reasons that organizations may have these ancillary groups. Sometimes it's to just honor former board members or board chairs or major donors. They have no power at all, but they love seeing their name on the letterhead. And you keep them engaged, and hopefully they continue to be donors. It can also be used as a pipeline for potential new board members. So you have a junior committee or some other kind of group that the whole point is they will give some volunteer time. Maybe all they do is work on the annual gala, or maybe there's some other special thing. But then you get to, like Merle said, you get to see them in action and see if there's good alignment, and potentially they could become board members. So there's different ways that organizations use these ancillary groups. Most elected officials are not allowed to sit on boards, so it could be for that reason. They do care, they're interested. They can't be a board member, but they can be an ex officio.
I also wanted to follow up on what Angela was saying. It's great to have advisory councils and youth councils and this thing and that thing. Make sure they have work.
Yeah.
Everybody, some people would like to see their name on the letterhead, and they're fine with that. But it's the same thing, to a lesser degree as a board. Just make sure they have work. Make sure they feel like they're contributing to the organization in some way.
And for the two people in the room, if memory serves, who raised their hand, but a cautionary tale for everybody else. My organization, for some reason, was a fairly popular organization before I joined it. I have no credit. I claim no credit for that. Still popular. But anyway, we have a board that is capped at 25, and we have an advisory council. And I found out our advisory council was created because some 12 years ago, I found an old set of bylaws that our board limit was 77 people. Somebody wisely sort of said, can we fix this? Hence the birth of the advisory council in my organization, and dropping the board number back down to 25 to a manageable number. So there's another reason to potentially have some of these groups. If you have tons of people who want to be involved, you don't have to list them all in the 990, if nothing else. I think there was one, well, there's a few more hands, but I think there was six. Number 6, I think, was in the back. Yeah, there. And then we'll go to 1, 2, and I saw 3 over here somewhere. Oh, 4, 5, 6, if we get time. We got 3 minutes. Yikes.
Go.
Rapid fire questions.
So I am actually a strategic planning consultant at a nonprofit, and because I work with several different organizations, I work with all different kinds of boards, and 2 startups that are in transition ran into kind of similar conflicts in terms of diversifying their boards. And I was wondering about what you all thought of navigating the power dynamics that come into play, particularly, one instance, when you're thinking about nothing about us without us, and the served population of the organization is like youth or people with learning disabilities and folks like that, as well as, another board that I had that was moving from startup to maturity had exactly one person of color on their board, and every time that any question of diversity was raised up, people would say, oh, did so-and-so say that? And so I wonder, what would you all think of navigating and setting up boards for success to try and get those dynamics back into balance?
I think it comes back to leadership. Your ED and your board chair have to have a strong vision of compositionally and culturally how they want to run the board. And to your point, nobody wants the responsibility of being the one minority that represents all minority on the board. And,
Right.
That's a sucky position to be in. And so if you're an effective leader in one of those capacities, you ensure that person isn't on the spot for that. And the other thing, obviously, from a diversity standpoint, if you have a diverse board, the diverse board will help maintain the diversity of the board.
Right.
Staff are often out ahead of the board in terms of DEI, and most often are working with some sort of consultant. They're not trying to do this on their own. It's sort of the blind leading the blind. And it's unfortunate if the board is also not working with a diversity consultant, or if the organization on staff has somebody who oversees the DEI portion. It doesn't mean that everybody's not involved, but somebody who's responsible for making sure that it's infused organization-wide. The board should be included in that. So if that's not happening, that would be my advice. Bring in a consultant, and the board needs training just as the staff does. One other thing, I have seen some organizations making sure on their matrix that diversity is one of the things they're looking for, and they make some sort of a pledge. We're going to bring in 3 people of color together, so that there's not just this one person and all eyes flip to that one person every time a diversity question comes up. And so trying to do some heavy duty populating all at once.
And the only thing I'll add is to your first half of your question there about sort of if there are any constraints about the population served sort of serving on the board, is I would sort of say if it's to use a slightly ridiculous but example, right? Like if you're an organization that serves infants 0 to 3, clearly like you can, but the point then is to have, but the point is to, for example, find board members whose primary role and occupation is caregiver of that age group, who therefore have intimate firsthand knowledge, right? If you serve teens and young people and by law you have to have 18, they have to be 18 and up or something, then there's where the longer term vision of is someone who was served by the organization when they were a teen and a young person who now may be 18, but who have firsthand experience of the services provided by the organization. Sort of thinking about those types of people who have intimate firsthand knowledge of the community and of the work, if you can't for any reason have an actual person who represents the population, is to have people who truly know it, not just people who care about it, right? That's, I think, the key factor in terms of the value, and to make sure that that perspective as best as possible is represented in the discussions.
The National Down Syndrome Society for 20, 30 years has always had somebody with Down syndrome on the board, but the expectations of that person's time, talent, and treasure is different than the expectations of people who do not have Down syndrome on the board. So that's one way of accommodating.
Yeah. So I'm noting that both there was wide applause next door and that we are out of time. So we're gonna have to wrap here, but obviously folks are available. We'll be here for most of the day to sit there and chat. Join me in thanking these fabulous panelists. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
And most importantly, thank you all for the work that you're doing
Yes,
in the sector. Because again, as Tom said, as most folks have said, this is really sort of what makes our world better. So happy to have you all here, and we'll see you in a little bit.
And thank you to
Thank
you.
you.